Chicago is one of the most iconic cities in America. The skyline, the food, the music, the history. So why are hundreds of thousands of people packing up and walking away from it? The answers might surprise you. This is why people are leaving Chicago. It's not what you think. The numbers don't lie. Let's start with the raw reality. Chicago has been losing residents for years, and the pace has accelerated in ways that are hard to ignore. Between 2020 and 2023, the Chicago metropolitan area lost more than 100,000 residents, making it one of the fastest shrinking major metros in the United States. Cook County, which contains the city proper, lost population every single year from 2015 through 2023. The U.S. Census Bureau tracks these shifts closely, and Chicago keeps showing up near the top of the wrong lists, cities hemorrhaging people rather than gaining them. The city's population peaked somewhere around 3.6 million back in 1950. Today it sits closer to 2.6 million and trending downward. Illinois as a whole lost population for 8 consecutive years between 2014 and 2022, a trend almost unheard of for a state with a major global city at its center. The state has ranked among the top 3 in outbound migration for moving truck rentals, a blunt but honest measure, for years running. U-Haul's annual migration data consistently shows more trucks leaving Illinois than arriving. At some point, a pattern that persistent stops being an anomaly and starts being a policy outcome. Now, if you ask most people why they think people leave Chicago, they'll say crime. And sure, crime is a factor. We'll get to that. But it's not the whole picture, and for a lot of people, it's not even the main reason. The story is more complicated, more layered, and frankly, more interesting than that. The tax burden nobody warned you about. Here's something that catches a lot of people off guard when they actually sit down with their finances. Illinois has one of the highest combined tax burdens in the country, and Chicago cranks that up even further. Illinois has a flat state income tax rate of 4.95%. That sounds reasonable until you stack everything else on top of it. Cook County and the city of Chicago layer on additional taxes covering everything from property to sales to streaming services. Yes, Chicago had a streaming tax, a 9% levy on Netflix, Spotify, and similar services, making it one of the first cities in the country to tax your binge-watching habits. Property taxes in the Chicago area are brutal, particularly for homeowners who have watched their tax bills climb faster than their home values. Illinois consistently ranks among the top 2 or 3 states in the nation for property tax rates. For a middle-class family in the suburbs, it's not unusual to pay $8,000, $10,000, or even $15,000 a year in property taxes on a modest home. As one longtime Chicago homeowner put it, "I love this city. I love my neighborhood. But I'm paying more in property taxes than my parents paid for their mortgage." When people start doing the math, especially retirees on fixed incomes or families trying to build savings, the numbers often don't add up. States like Tennessee, Florida, and Texas have no state income tax at all. The financial math of leaving becomes very hard to argue with. And the pension crisis sitting underneath all of this makes the tax situation look like it's going to get worse before it gets better. Illinois has roughly $200 billion in unfunded pension liabilities, a number so large it essentially guarantees future tax increases. People who can read a balance sheet look at that figure and start thinking about exit strategies. There is also the matter of what Chicagoans are getting in return for their tax dollars, which is a conversation that tends to go quiet pretty fast. The city's infrastructure, roads, water mains, public transit, is aging and underfunded. The Chicago Transit Authority regularly faces budget shortfalls. In 2023, the Illinois Tollway reported a backlog of deferred maintenance projects stretching into the billions. People paying some of the highest property taxes in the country look around at crumbling viaducts and potholed streets and ask a reasonable question: where is the money actually going? The answer, largely, is pension obligations to retired public employees, a financial structure that benefits the past at the expense of the present. That's not a conservative talking point. That's just arithmetic. The cost of everything else. Taxes alone don't tell the whole story of what it costs to live in Chicago. The city is expensive in ways that accumulate quietly over time. Housing costs in desirable Chicago neighborhoods have climbed sharply. A two-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, Lakeview, or Wicker Park will run you $2,500 to $3,500 a month or more. Buying a home in the better school districts pushes you toward $500,000 and up. And then that property tax bill arrives to remind you what you signed up for. Utilities are higher than average. Car insurance in Chicago ranks among the highest in the nation, partly because of traffic density, partly because of fraud rates, and partly because Illinois insurance regulations create their own complications. Parking tickets, city stickers, and wheel tax fees add up in the background like a slow drip. Add it all together, and Chicago is simply not the affordable Midwestern city it used to be positioned as compared to coastal metros. The gap between Chicago and, say, Nashville or Raleigh has narrowed considerably, and the gap between Chicago and somewhere like Phoenix or Dallas is enormous. In Dallas's favor, young professionals making decent salaries increasingly look at their take-home pay, look at their rent, look at their tax bill, and start doing the math on what it would take to buy a house and save for retirement somewhere else. And it's not just the big-ticket items. The cost of everyday life in Chicago adds friction in small but consistent ways. Dining out is expensive. Groceries in many city neighborhoods carry a premium compared to suburban stores. Childcare costs rank among the highest in the Midwest. Combine all of that with the reality that wages in Chicago, while solid, do not keep pace with the total cost of living gap between Chicago and the Sunbelt metros it's losing people to. And you have a slow-motion financial pressure that compounds over time. People don't always leave because of a single breaking point. Sometimes they leave because they've been doing the math for 3 years and the math finally wins. The weather problem. Yes, really. Nobody moves to Chicago for the weather. That's been a given for a very long time. But the weather has always been part of the unspoken deal. You put up with brutal winters and sweltering, humid summers because the city offers enough in return. For a long time, that deal held. But remote work has rewritten the terms of that deal for a significant number of people. When your job requires you to be in the office 5 days a week, you tolerate the commute on the L, the January wind chill that hits -20 on a bad day, and the 4 months of gray sky that Chicago winter delivers almost every year. You're there because you have to be. The city's energy and culture make it worth it. When remote work really arrived, not just as a fringe benefit but as a permanent arrangement for millions of workers, people suddenly realized they could have their salary and live somewhere warm. That calculation wasn't available before. It is now. Chicago winters are legitimately severe. The city earned its Windy City reputation honestly, and the cold that comes off Lake Michigan in January and February is not a minor inconvenience. It's a real quality of life factor. People who have the option to relocate to the Sunbelt and keep their income are increasingly taking that option. Phoenix added over 100,000 new residents between 2020 and 2023. So did the Dallas-Fort Worth Metro. The correlation between remote work adoption and Sunbelt migration is not a coincidence. It's also worth noting that Chicago summers, while genuinely beautiful at their best, bring their own complications. The humidity can be brutal. Violent thunderstorms roll across the lake with little warning. The beautiful lakefront parks that define the city's summer identity are, when they're actually accessible, packed beyond comfort on any decent weekend in July. For several months of the year, Chicago offers some of the best outdoor living of any American city. For several other months, it asks you to pay for the privilege of enduring conditions that require real gear and genuine tolerance. When that tolerance is optional rather than mandatory, more people are choosing not to exercise it. Crime. Let's be honest about what it actually is. It would be dishonest to write about Chicago departures and skip this entirely, so here it is with some context. Chicago does have serious crime problems in specific areas. The city's homicide numbers in certain neighborhoods, particularly on the south and west sides, are genuinely alarming and have been for decades. In 2021, Chicago recorded over 800 homicides, the highest total in 25 years. The city has struggled for years to address concentrated poverty, disinvestment, and gang violence in a relatively small number of communities. That's real, and it matters. But here's what the crime narrative often misses. Most of Chicago, geographically, statistically, is not experiencing that level of violence. The North Side neighborhoods, the lakefront, the suburbs, and many South Side communities have crime rates comparable to other large American cities. A resident of Evanston or Naperville, or even many Chicago neighborhoods, lives a fairly normal urban life without daily exposure to the violence that dominates national headlines. What crime does affect more broadly is the perception of safety, and perception shapes decisions. When Chicago's name becomes shorthand in national media for urban dysfunction, people who have never experienced a problem in their own block still absorb that narrative. They worry about their kids. They worry about property values. They worry about what the future looks like. As one former North Side resident said, "I never felt unsafe in my neighborhood. But I started asking myself, where is this city heading? And I didn't love my answer." That psychological weight, the sense that things are going the wrong direction even when your personal experience is fine, drives departures in ways that are hard to quantify but very real. The school question. If there is one factor that quietly drives more upper-middle-class family departures from Chicago than any other, it might be this: the public school system. Chicago Public Schools serves roughly 320,000 students and is the third largest school district in the country. It has genuinely excellent selective enrollment schools: Northside College Prep, Walter Payton College Prep, Whitney Young, that produce outstanding outcomes and send students to elite universities. The problem is the competition to get into those schools is fierce, the process is stressful, and the non-selective neighborhood schools vary enormously in quality. For families who don't win that lottery, the alternatives are expensive private schools or a move to the suburbs. The suburbs tell a different story. Districts like New Trier, Naperville Unit District 203, and Highland Park's North Shore District 112 consistently rank among the best public school systems in the entire country. They're well-funded, stable, and don't require your child to ace a competitive exam to get into a decent education. So what happens? Families with young children, particularly families who can afford to, move to the suburbs when the kids hit school age. It's a story as old as the post-war suburbs themselves, and it hasn't stopped. Except now, some of those families don't stop in the suburbs. They go further, to states with lower taxes and newer housing stock and school systems they like just as much. The Chicago Metro loses the family formation demographic at a higher rate than it loses young singles. And that gap matters for the long-term urban health of the city. There is a particular irony embedded in this story. Some of the same families who moved to Chicago in their mid-20s because they wanted the energy and culture of a major city, who loved the neighborhoods, the restaurants, the lakefront, the social scene, find themselves 5 years later sitting across from each other at the kitchen table with a spreadsheet open, trying to figure out which suburb has the best school district within their price range. The city that attracted them as young adults doesn't always work for the version of themselves they become. And once they're in the suburbs, the gravity pulling them further away from Chicago, towards states with lower overall costs, starts to work on them too. What remote work actually did to Chicago? It's worth spending a little more time on remote work because its effect on Chicago specifically was significant and somewhat different from other cities. Chicago built its post-industrial economy on corporate headquarters: Boeing, United Airlines, Caterpillar, McDonald's, Kraft Heinz, Walgreens. The list of major corporate headquarters based in the Chicago area is long and impressive. That corporate base fed a professional class that lived in the city and the near suburbs, filled the restaurants and theaters and office towers, and sustained the urban economy. Remote work didn't just let people move away, it also caused some of those corporations to reconsider their Chicago footprints. Boeing relocated its headquarters to Arlington, Virginia in 2022. Citadel, the massive hedge fund that was deeply associated with Chicago's financial identity, moved its headquarters to Miami in 2022. Caterpillar moved its headquarters to Irving, Texas in 2022 as well. 3 major corporate headquarters gone in a single year, that's not a coincidence, and it's not a blip. Executives moving to lower tax states, taking their payrolls and their civic presence with them, represents a structural shift that ordinary residents notice, even if they can't always name exactly what they're reacting to. There is also the downstream effect to consider. When a corporate headquarters leaves a city, it doesn't just take the C-suite executives with it. It takes the law firms that did their legal work, the PR agencies that managed their communications, the catering companies that fed their meetings, the event planners who ran their conferences. Corporate headquarters generate economic activity that ripples outward through dozens of industries and thousands of jobs. Losing several of them in a concentrated period of time creates a vacuum that takes years to fill, if it gets filled at all. Chicago's financial sector, long one of its crown jewels, has also faced pressure. The city is home to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and the Chicago Board Options Exchange, 2 of the most important financial exchanges in the world. But the trading firms and hedge funds that once considered Chicago their natural home have increasingly distributed their operations or relocated key teams to lower tax jurisdictions. The money is still moving through Chicago's exchanges. Fewer of the people managing that money are still living there. When the institutions that anchor an economy start quietly relocating, it sends a signal. And signals affect behavior. The people who are actually leaving. So who exactly is leaving? The picture is more nuanced than a simple flight from crime narrative. The highest departure rates are among middle and upper middle income earners. The people with the financial flexibility to leave and the most to gain from lower taxes and lower costs elsewhere. They're not fleeing violence on their block. They're fleeing a fiscal situation they don't trust, school systems they're uncertain about, and a cost structure that compares unfavorably to other options. Retirees are leaving in significant numbers. Illinois' treatment of retirement income in its tax code has historically been more favorable than many states, but property taxes still hammer retired homeowners on fixed incomes. Florida and Arizona and Tennessee have become magnetic for older Chicagoans who want their winters back and their tax bills reduced. Young professionals with remote work flexibility are leaving for warmer climates, lower costs, and cities that feel like they're growing rather than contracting. Austin, Nashville, Denver, and the Research Triangle in North Carolina all pull from Chicago's young professional pool. Working class and lower income residents also leave, but often for different reasons. Job availability, family networks, affordability in specific neighborhoods. This movement is less discussed, but equally real. What's notable is who isn't leaving in large numbers: recent immigrants. Chicago's immigrant communities, particularly in neighborhoods like Pilsen, Little Village, Rogers Park, and Albany Park, have shown stronger residential stability than native-born populations. New arrivals tend to put down roots and stay. This pattern has historical precedent. Chicago was built by waves of immigrants: Polish, Italian, Irish, German, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Chinese, who arrived with nothing and built tight-knit communities that defined the city's character for generations. That process is still happening. The Chinatown neighborhood on the near south side has seen population growth even as surrounding areas have declined. Little Village on the southwest side remains one of the densest and most commercially active neighborhoods in the city. The immigrant communities are not fleeing. The uncomfortable reality for Chicago's civic leadership is that the population they are losing tends to be the population with the most economic mobility. The earners, the property taxpayers, the families who fund the school systems and the business districts. The population that is staying or growing is, in many cases, less economically mobile and more dependent on city services. That is not a criticism of those residents, but it creates a structural fiscal problem, a shrinking tax base serving a population with growing needs. It's a math problem, and it doesn't get easier over time without deliberate and sustained intervention. What Chicago gets right, and why some people are moving back. It would be lazy and inaccurate to write Chicago off entirely. And this video isn't trying to do that. Because here's the thing. Chicago is still a genuinely great city in a lot of measurable ways. The cultural infrastructure is extraordinary. The Art Institute of Chicago is one of the finest art museums in the world. The city's theater scene, Second City, Steppenwolf, the Chicago Shakespeare Theater, is legitimately world-class. The restaurant scene has always been exceptional, and it still is. The architecture alone is worth the airfare. Chicago's public transit system, the L, is aging and underfunded, but still provides coverage that most Sunbelt cities simply don't offer. You can live without a car in large parts of Chicago. Try that in Phoenix or Dallas. The neighborhoods retain genuine character. There's a reason people who grew up in Logan Square or Hyde Park or Beverly talk about their neighborhoods with a warmth and specificity that you don't always hear from people who grew up in a suburban subdivision. Chicago's urban fabric, its block structure, its two flats, its corner taverns, creates a kind of community attachment that's hard to replicate. Chicago also remains one of the best food cities in the country by any honest measure. Deep dish pizza is a genuine culinary achievement, whatever the New York contingent wants to say about it. The steakhouses are legendary. The Vietnamese restaurants on Argyle Street, the Polish delis in Avondale, the Mexican taquerias along 26th Street in Little Village. The city's immigrant communities have built a food culture with actual depth and authenticity, rather than the sanitized version of ethnic cuisine you find in suburban strip malls. And some people are returning or arriving for the first time. Remote workers from New York and San Francisco have discovered that Chicago offers a similar urban experience at a significantly lower price point. The neighborhoods that have maintained stability and investment, Lincoln Square, Andersonville, Bridgeport, Beverly, attract new residents who have done the math and decided Chicago still wins on value. As one transplant from San Francisco put it, I pay half the rent, the pizza is better, and I can actually afford to save money. I have no idea why I waited this long. The political layer. It's impossible to talk about Chicago departures without at least acknowledging the political dimension, even though it's more complicated than most people want to admit. Illinois is a heavily Democratic state, and Chicago is one of the most democratic large cities in the country. The political culture shapes policy in ways that affect daily life. Labor regulations, zoning decisions, public employee contracts, spending priorities. Some people who leave cite frustration with that political environment explicitly. Business owners who find the regulatory climate unfriendly. Taxpayers who look at public employee pension commitments and conclude the math doesn't work. Conservatives and libertarians who simply don't want to live in a place where their political views are a permanent minority. That's real. But it's worth noting that plenty of people who are fiscally conservative stay in Chicago because they love the city. And plenty of liberal-leaning people leave Chicago because their rent is too high. Politics shapes the conditions of a city over time, but the immediate decisions people make about moving are usually more personal and more financial than purely ideological. Chicago's political culture also has a complicated relationship with reform. The city has a long history of machine politics. Aldermanic power, concentrated in ward organizations, contract decisions that benefit the politically connected, a culture of patronage that has been documented and prosecuted for decades. The 2023 conviction of former Alderman Ed Burke on federal corruption charges was the latest chapter in a story Chicago has been telling about itself since the days of Richard J. Daley. Residents who watch that cycle repeat: corruption, prosecution, replacement, more corruption, develop a certain exhaustion with the machinery of city government, even if their personal neighborhood is functioning fine. The political framing that dominates social media, people are fleeing Democrat-run cities, oversimplifies a migration pattern driven by dozens of variables into a single talking point. The reality is that people are making complicated cost-benefit calculations, and politics is one input among many. What happens next? So what does the future look like? Chicago has made genuine efforts to stabilize its population. Mayor Brandon Johnson's administration has focused on investment in South and West Side communities as a violence reduction strategy. The city has pursued tax increment financing districts, economic development zones, and affordable housing programs with mixed results. The pension crisis remains the single largest structural threat to the city's long-term fiscal health. The state legislature has passed some reform measures over the years, but Illinois' pension obligations are constitutionally protected in a way that makes dramatic restructuring legally difficult. The bill will come due. The only questions are when and how large. Infrastructure investment offers some hope. The planned expansion of transit options, continued investment in the lakefront, and the tech sector growth on the near north side and in the West Loop have attracted younger, higher-income residents who appreciate what the city offers. There are genuine bright spots worth naming. The Illinois Medical District on the near west side is one of the largest medical districts in the world, anchoring a concentration of hospitals, research institutions, and biotech companies that provide tens of thousands of stable jobs. The University of Chicago and Northwestern University are world-class institutions that attract talent and generate research and commercial activity. Chicago's position as a logistics and transportation hub, sitting at the intersection of more Class I railroads than any other city in North America, gives it economic fundamentals that don't vanish because of a headline about crime or a corporate relocation announcement. Chicago has come back from worse. The city was widely written off in the 1970s and 1980s. Population dropping, industry leaving, neighborhoods struggling. And it came back with a genuine renaissance through the 1990s and 2000s. That history matters. Cities with Chicago's bones don't just disappear, but the challenges stacking up right now. The pension math, the tax burden, the corporate relocations, the remote work shift, the school quality disparities are serious and interconnected. Solving one doesn't automatically solve the others. The bottom line: people are leaving Chicago for reasons that are rational, personal, and varied. Some are running from something. Some are running toward something better. Most are doing a little of both. The crime narrative is part of the story, but not the whole story. And leaning on it too hard misses the fiscal and structural problems that are driving departures across income levels and neighborhoods that have no particular crime problem at all. Chicago is a city that has always reinvented itself. It burned to the ground in 1871 and rebuilt into one of the architectural wonders of the modern world. It lost its industrial base in the late 20th century and rebuilt a service and professional economy that remained a global hub. The capacity for reinvention is real. The city also has something that can't be manufactured: identity. Chicago knows what it is. It has a chip on its shoulder about New York and Los Angeles that has produced genuine art, genuine architecture, genuine comedy, and genuine food culture. The blues came through Chicago. House music was born in Chicago. improv comedy as we know it was developed in Chicago. That cultural DNA doesn't evaporate because Boeing moved to Virginia or because property taxes are unreasonable. Whether that reinvention can outpace the pension obligations, the tax burden, the corporate relocations, and the quiet, steady math of people moving somewhere cheaper and warmer. That remains the open question. There are people inside city government, inside the business community, and inside Chicago's neighborhoods who are working hard on that question. Whether their efforts add up to enough fast enough is something only time will answer. What is certain is that the people leaving Chicago are not, by and large, giving up on cities. They're giving up on this particular set of trade-offs. And Chicago's long-term future depends on whether it can change enough of those trade-offs to make the math work again for the people who are currently voting with their feet. And that is why people are leaving Chicago. It's not what you think. It's all of it at once. If you found this video informative, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind America's biggest cities and the forces shaping where people choose to live. We post new videos every week, and there's a lot more to explore.